How many kids do you have?
I got a 9-year-old. She'll be 10 soon, and a 4-year-old.
Okay.
A girl and a boy.
So you're a dad.
I am. Super dad.
Is that your identity?
It is. It is. In fact, I have on my bio, dude/dad as my pronouns.
Dude, dad. Yeah. Yeah, I was imagining.
I'm about to get rid of that, though. I'm tired of the pronoun wars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I never.
Like the dude dad on my bio, I think I want to wipe it just because I feel like I'm partaking in the pronoun wars, even by using that silliness.
Yeah.
So I think it's time. I've also wondered about this Steve White quote I've had on there since like my first few months of starting Twitter. I've left it on there forever. I don't talk to Steve all that much anymore. I still love Steve. Or just paths don't cross as much. And I've often wondered, like, does he not like that a quote of his is on my bio?
Why would he?
Because a lot of things
like
I
that?
Say, Steve probably doesn't love, you know?
Who's Steve White? I don't know.
You don't know Steve White?
Many things in this world.
He's kind of in our pocket of Twitter. Very analytical guy, smart as shit. Big fan of Steve. One of the reasons I love Steve so much and where he really won my respect was early on in all the COVID banter. He was one of the few people who could really sit down and go over the stuff logically instead of it just being all emotion and, and tribes on each side. Steve was not in the same camp I was, but he has a very good ability at like setting emotion aside and sitting down and talking logically about something. And that's what was so needed back then. So he won my respect as well. And he once posted, I guess somebody made a comment about me being, I don't know, rude or something. And he said, Theo comes in hot, but he's good people. I added it in my bio, and it's been up there for 2 years.
Well, that's a great quote. That's a great. I wouldn't be. I don't think that describes me, but I wouldn't mind being described that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. So the other day I posted something, and one of the trans activist swarm came in, and they were all mad about my words. And then one of them tagged Steve and said, "I see the quote in your bio. Steve, would you still agree with this about Theo?" And I felt like I was in middle school.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, if he's getting flack because of you, I understand. Yeah. That's difficult, but you can always just anonymize him.
True. How's the sound on your end, by the way? Did I do okay with this setup?
It's good.
Right.
It's good.
Sweet.
Sounds great.
I bought one of these bad boys.
Yeah, those aren't too bad.
Sure, something or other.
Yeah, you're going to do more of these? Is this an investment? You're going to get some recording software?
I did invest so that if I did more, I wouldn't have to buy more equipment. But no, I don't have anything on the program except for you, Mr. Boyce.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's my program, but it's your show.
I like that. I appreciate the fact you brought me here very much. So thank you. It's very kind of you to share your stage with me.
Well, no, I've been after you for a while because you do come in hot, but you're good people. And you're consistently poking the bear. Well, how would you describe what your MO is?
So prior to 2020, I had never had a social media account of any kind. I was a computer nerd growing up. I was there before the internet started. I majored in computers in college because I just assumed I've always used computers. That's what I'll do as a profession. But whatever, without getting into my life history, that didn't work out. The dot-com boom happened. There were no jobs for IT majors. I ended up teaching, and I just stayed away from social media entirely. I kind of lived a social media-free life. Now, I was very much a message board warrior. I don't know if you've been into that scene in your life.
On what topic? Like fishing or God?
All over the place. Well, I mean, I went everywhere from Miami Hurricanes football to Wine Spectator, wine tasting notes. So I was all over the place.
Okay.
But I loved the message boards. I was a message board kind of guy. Okay. So I guess in a weird way, I was like quasi using social media. I just never had Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those accounts. And I had stayed away with them kind of intentionally. I lived two different lives. I left my life in Washington, D.C. to start over because I was kind of headed in a bad direction with good people, if that makes any sense. And so initially I stayed off Facebook and all of that because it was sort of a bridge back to my old life. This is back when, man, those sites were just coming out. But anyhow, back to the question you asked me. In 2020, I saw the world going to shit. I saw the country that I love so much becoming something that I barely recognized. And the thing that bothered me the most is what I talk about on The Bird all the time is the Truman Show. Just this idea that we now have an apparatus that can broadcast an entirely faux existence that some people are living entirely inside. From the moment they wake up and check their phone to the news show they watch, the radio on the way to work, the social media at work, and then the same process back to bed, their entire existence is now in essence whatever this artificial theater is that they wanted to create. And I was watching this spin out of control. I mean, one of the clearest examples of that was the Jacob Blake incident, where all of our media ran that he was unarmed. You had to look at the video for 10 seconds to see the guy was carrying a knife. But that's a phenomenal example of the power of the Truman Show, because look what happened in that town as a result of those media flames, right? So around 2020, I was reading Twitter a lot. In fact, you were one of the pages that I'd visit every day. There were about 12 people who I'd scroll through every day. And I just got this burning feeling of like, I need to enter the fray. I need to try to do what I can to help push this tide back, which was really just about opening eyes, about spreading awareness to the idea that what you're being told does not necessarily pair with reality. So I kind of dove in, I don't know, it was the first or second week of November, right after the election. And that's really been my MO ever since. It's, you know, I talk like I know a lot on that platform, but I don't mean to come across like I know a lot. I'm just some dude from Florida. I'm a lawyer who likes to read and analyze. And when you do that in our current information environment, you quickly realize what we're being told does not pair with reality. So the jackhammer-like fingers over the last 2 years have really been locked into that the whole time. From this topic to that topic to that topic, it's been a matter of what are we being told? What underlies it? Like what constitutes the position they're putting forward? And does it hold water? And what's crazy is you'll find about 80% of the time the answer is no. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's really been the driving engine the whole time.
You mentioned DC. Were you deep stating? Were you wading into the deep end of the pool?
No, I was a base brat. So I had lived in 7 places by the time I was in 6th grade, but I did the majority of my childhood, my teenage years, your formative early years in suburbs of DC, Fairfax County, Virginia area. Awesome area. Loved it. Had some great boys, but me and the boys weren't exactly headed in a great place.
Okay.
And so
like criminal, like you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And caught a few charges. We were doing some dumb shit. So I love them. Still talk to a lot of those guys, but it was time to start over. And I literally did that. I went to school in South Florida, packed up everything, had my folks drive me down there and drop me off. And I didn't know anybody within like 3,000 miles. And it was awesome because I play back my life sequence, and it's like I've literally lived 2 different lives, and in a weird way they complement each other.
What was the moment where you were scared straight, or some sort of moral compunction came over you and said, this isn't the direction for me? It's kind of surreal to think back to that era in life, because we were doing stuff that was not reflective of the life we were born into and were living, meaning we were involved in stuff we should have never been involved in. And in all honesty, it was around like my senior year of high school when I realized I just needed to move on. There wasn't exactly like a event. There was a couple that went really bad and involved some people leaving the state forever and some people going to jail and that kind of stuff. But it was sort of more of a realization of like, okay, these are good people and I'm in a good place, but for some reason I'm stuck in a vortex that's taking me in a bad direction. And I kind of thought, if I stay there, it's going to be more the same. And college was right around the corner. And so it was like, okay, time to start over. And I'm glad I did. Living that life in DC and then starting over in Miami it was actually perfect for me, because Miami is a big city that can chew you up real quick. So a lot of that, pardon my French, bullshit that I was living with, it wouldn't have flown when I was solo in Miami. And so it helped grow me up real fast, if you know what I mean. Well, putting yourself back in that person at that time, like what did you want, or what did you see when you looked into the future? Like
when I was thinking about leaving in Virginia, or when I was down in Florida?
Well, I guess it changed, but like, what did you want? Like, were you ambitious person, or were you kind of, I just want something different, or?
I've always been driven, and I've always enjoyed passion pursuits. I created a BBS bulletin board system back before there was the internet when I was like 12 years old. And I had about 10,000 users in the Northern Virginia area. It was really cool.
Wow.
The BBS era was awesome. I don't know if
like some sort of like proto 4chan kind of thing?
Yeah. Did you ever use BBSs at all? No. Pre-internet days? No. All right. Well, a BBS was simply, before there was the internet, used a single modem to connect to, 2 computers, the old kind of thing. Yeah. And the BBSs were all just text-based, but you could play games, you could chat, message boards, and then most importantly, we all pirated software together. So I had been into that for quite a while, and then I started one in 1991, and it was crazy because it was this little IBM computer in the corner of my bedroom that would just run all day. There was somebody on that phone line all day long, and I was just talking about this the other day. I used to be able to pop in and hit F10. I was the SysOp, the system operator, and we could see live keystrokes. And at the time, that was freaking revolutionary. I mean, it was like, to see a live keystroke absolutely blew me and my boy's mind. now you think of like the world our kids are born into, and they couldn't fathom how neat that was. So, I mean, like projects like that, I've always been into, I've always been driven in that regard, but I never really had a direction in answer to your overriding question. Like, again, I grew up talented on computers in the roaring 90s. Everybody was getting rich. All you had to do was go into computers and you were going to be successful and wealthy, right? So I kind of didn't craft a good path for myself when I went to school. So, I'll major in computers, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then upon finishing school, I realized that the majority of computer careers involve sitting in a cubicle hammering code all day. Duh. And that's not what I enjoy at all. I mean, that's not my skill set in this world. And so I left everything having to do with IT and became a math teacher in middle school.
Oh.
Quite a change.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big switch. My wife was a teacher and I was now unemployed. So she said, I'm going to drive you down to school and see if you can sub. And I walked in, got an interview with the principal, and I was teaching 8th grade math the next Monday.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of weird for that school because, that principal took a big risk. He didn't even know who I was. But all's well that ends well.
Yeah. Well, a little light nepotism doesn't hurt no one. Right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And that was fun, man. I love teaching so much. I'd be teaching today if there was more money to be made in that field. It's the only time I've ever truly enjoyed work. I enjoyed being there. I felt like I was doing something. I enjoyed the people. It was like mental steroids being in school every day as work, Yeah. But you were capped at $35,000, $40,000 a year, sadly.
What did you learn from the 8th graders from middle school? From teaching?
I learned a lot. One of the most smacky in the face thing I learned in being in middle school, and so this would have been 2001, 2004 era, was that boys and girls are very different. The boys I found had constant conflict, but the conflict entailed getting really mad at each other, punching each other in the face, and then they go throw the football. The girls would spend a year, coming up with like a campaign to destroy each other's lives. Like the level of viciousness amongst middle school girls was pretty shocking to me. Obviously, I'm sure that's not true across the board, right?
No, they grow out of it. That's why the internet is such a peaceful place.
Yeah.
Both from the male and the female point of view.
Yeah, exactly. they haven't much at all. Another thing that I really took from there was it's important to enjoy what you do for work. After the experience of teaching, I went into door-to-door copier sales. So talk about like two polar ends of the spectrum.
Okay. Yeah.
I was making great money, but my life was miserable. And it was an interesting contrast. Like after the fact, to go back and analyze those two periods of your life and realize, okay, in chapter 1, you were making absolutely nothing, but you were so happy and it was fulfilling and you could feel the reward of what you were doing every day. And then in chapter 2, your work couldn't have been any more miserable. You would have gotten out of any day of work you could have, but you're making great bank. What's the win in life? It's kind of hard. I don't think there's a right answer there. I came away from it realizing the win in life is found much more in the former than the latter. Time is short. One of the greatest quotes I've heard in life is when you get really, really successful, I guess really monetarily, when you're filthy rich, the most valuable thing in life becomes time. And no matter how much money you have, you can't buy more of it. And that idea has always stuck in my head, that feeling value in what you do every day is a hell of a paycheck, Now I'm practicing law and I'm not exactly getting tons of value out of it. So maybe I ended up somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what I do now. I'm an attorney now.
What was the mind change getting into law?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So after computer world just wasn't focused enough and didn't work out, and then teaching world pushed me out because of the money, and then copier world was paying great, but I was miserable. My wife and I decided to leave South Florida and go join some family in a different part of Florida. And I just found some jobs when I was there. None of them were great. I wasn't really happy in them. They were okay. And I just, like going back to what I was just talking about, having a passion for what you do, right? I didn't have that at all at this point in my life. And I was in Aruba with my father-in-law. They vacation there a lot, and I was fortunate enough to tag along. And he and I are smoking a cigar on the beach of Aruba. And I guess just talking about life. I love my father-in-law. He's a fascinating guy. And my father was an attorney, importantly. So I've always loved the practice of law. I've always had a, quote, lawyer brain. But I said to my father on that beach, he said to me, why don't you go into law? Why don't you go to law school? And I said, I forget how I articulated it, but the idea was that to go to law school at that point in my life, I was maybe 30, 31, was to accept failure. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but from my early teenage years, going to school when everybody's getting rich in the dot-com world, like I just thought with, the skill sets that I had and the background that I had, those would equate to success and monetary success, and they hadn't. And I think in a weird way, to go back to school at 31 was to accept or admit that success hadn't occurred for me. The fire never lit, right?
Yeah.
And so that had pushed me away in a weird way. And my father-in-law looked at me like I was a dumbass and pretty much said, you're 30 years old. You're 31 years old. You got the rest of your life ahead of you. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's what you should be doing. And I came back from Aruba, signed up for a Kaplan LSAT course, shotgun admission. I was in law school by the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
And then law school taught me how to think. Law school doesn't teach you how to practice law. It teaches you how to think like a lawyer. And boy, I think it is the most useful, or, has the most utility of any degree out there, whether you practice law or not. The way that it helps you analyze information, analyze things logically, process problems and come up with remedies instead of flailing with emotion. Yeah. Those skills are just so incredibly valuable. One of my best friends, he's been practicing. He went to law school with me. And that dude doesn't know where the courthouse is. He's never been to court. He's never filed a pleading. He works in the business world. He's a negotiator. But that JD, those legal skills really help there. So I'm very glad I went to law school, and I hung my own shingle right out of school, which thankfully has been successful. I'm about 12 years into my own practice, which I enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. So I've loved it. It's been a great fit. It's taught me what I'm good at and what the tools are on my belt that I can use. But I don't necessarily have that fulfillment that I was talking about before. I think there's something else out there for me.
Well, I mean, you could always do a class action lawsuit against Pfizer or Moderna, right? I mean, that would be grand slam.
Yeah, I'd be happy to be part of that. No doubt about it. Yeah. That's sort of the path that landed me here. And it's funny because the last 2 years, that was my Twitter reminder that I had an interview with Benjamin Boyce tonight, or my alarm on my phone. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Hold on one sec. But anyhow, the last 2 years have been a fascinating experience because I didn't exactly plan on doing anything with all this daily ranting I've been doing on social media, and I still don't. But it's almost been like a positive midlife crisis, if that makes any sense. I always think of midlife crisis as being negative. You have an affair and go buy a Corvette or something. But it's been more of like a sense of, was I meant to do something else? Yeah. Is there it's been very fueling for me. It's like it's all clicked with me and has me feeling very energetic, and just sort of the sense of, was I meant to do more in this short run while I'm here? And that's been a really cool feeling at 43 years old with young kids at home, spent the last decade in the monotony of all that stuff. So I'm kind of living two lives now, right? I've got lawyer me that pays the bills, where I'm sitting now. And then I've got Twitter me, which is getting involved in all this stuff going on, consuming our country and our world. And this chat is the first time the two have ever really come together. But it'll be interesting to see whether that other me becomes part of real me, or if this is just a flash in the pan and one day I'll pull the cable and go back to my old life.
Yeah, yeah. So with regard to critical thinking, broadly speaking, lawyer mind, it's not just about analyzing data and solving problems. It's about getting what you want, or figuring out how to get somebody what they want, right? It's
Absolutely.
really about arranging information or making argument, I guess, building a case for something to win.
Yeah, exactly. There's an old quote, it's easy to be a lawyer when the facts are on your side. And that's very true. I mean, any lawyer can go into a trial where the light was red and the question is whether the light was red or green. Great lawyers are able to win a trial when the facts aren't on your side. And I agree with you. I think you described it well. It's a matter of, it's several different tools. One of the most important things is figuring out what is the valuable information amongst all the rest of the noise, right? And we learn a lot of those skills when you're reading case law. The majority of law school, you just read case law from decades ago. And for the most part, you read 20 extraordinarily difficult pages to read to pull maybe 3 important things out of it. And I think that process is important. Think about like the avalanche of information in the COVID vaccine sphere over the last 2 years. I mean, I lamented the other day, it's getting hard for me to operate in my space on Twitter there because so many, quote, of my own people are posting so much bullshit. There's enough good receipts to bring this whole thing down. We don't need all the bullshit, but we can't get rid of it. And I think being able to see through noise and identify what facts are important to what you're analyzing is a really important skill The other one I think you really pick up from the kind of lawyer way of thinking is how to get around a roadblock. Like, okay, I want to get from A to B, kind of back to computer coding is the same way. I want to get to A to B and I can't. But if I can get from A to C, C goes to D, and D gets to B, I can get there the same way. That's really how you build a case in law. It's like, where are your weaknesses, where are your strengths, and how am I going to bridge all this together to sell the person in the black robes that my story's better than the other guy's story.
Yeah, yeah. So social media has on one aspect, it's you projecting your thought, but it's also people responding to it. So there's this groupthink, echo chamber kind of thing going on. Or in order to not keep it an echo chamber or to constantly disrupt the echo chamber so that real data gets through or is organized correctly, you have to manage a lot. You're playing the crowd, right? You're not playing a judge. I guess it's a swarm judge.
Yeah,
right?
It is a crazy swarm judge.
Yeah, like a crowdsourced judge. So
yeah, exactly, and that's clearly the biggest danger of platforms like Twitter is just the echo effect, right? If I post something, the people who read your post want to hear, you're going to get a whole bunch of likes and a whole bunch of retweets, and we all have endorphins, and that feels great and all. But the reality is, you haven't accomplished all that much. Now, it's a little different in certain contexts, like COVID. I hit the same topics damn near every day, and the reason I do that is because without fail, somebody by the end of the day reads a thread that I wrote in May of 2021 and like, oh my God, I never knew that. And that drives me crazy. I mean, it's like jet fuel in the engines to keep doing it.
Okay.
But it freaks me out that, like, how is that possible? Because I've written the same thing 100 times in the last year and a half, and I'm just some little dude in the bigger space. Other bigger people are saying it. How has this person still not heard it, a year and a half later? So I think there is some value in certain cases with echoing, but to some extent, when you just say the crowd pleasers over and over, and everybody says, yeah, what have you really achieved?
Well, yeah.
I mean, you look at those accounts like JoJo on the left, or the other, doppelganger that was on the right that got spinning. They just post the same thing every day, and the crowd goes wild. But who cares? So there's a lot of danger in that, and I've seen some people, I won't name names, people that I used to like on that platform a lot, who changed a lot because of that echo effect. They got more excited to get the rousing high fives than they did continue speaking the things that made people listen to them in the first place.
Ego aside, there's still, like, you're trying to manage a crowd. You're trying to get the truth to stabilize in this very tumultuous sphere.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I guess one thing that you mentioned was repeating information, like being a repeater of the information and stuff. Mm-hmm. But have you found, like, you're able to nudge the conversation or at least contact people or get in contact with people who can think at the level that you want to think at or discuss things?
Absolutely. In fact, I kind of look at it the other way. Before I started contributing in this space, I was following some people who I really respected, really admired, particularly in the COVID sphere. I found through what I contributed, I guess really the volume that I did kind of over and over, I ultimately was able to get plugged into some of those circles. And that's really been an honor for me. I don't really feel like dropping names, but there's a dozen people that I just had such a respect level for and who are important in this space, not just they say funny things and have lots of followers. No, I mean, they're highlighting the issues that were critical for us to discuss, that weren't being discussed and that we weren't allowed to discuss. And the fact that I can wake up on a Saturday morning and type a thread now over coffee, and those people are reading it and responding to it is really neat. Goes to show you the magic of the platform. So for me, it's been kind of climbing that ladder. You see what I'm saying? It's like neat that I'm now plugged in there and able to have these high level conversations with people. Yeah. And back to your question, I mean, I've met so many. The most amazing people on Twitter have less than 500 followers. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. The gems out there are the small accounts. And man, I've met so many of them. There are so many brilliant, amazing people with so much to offer. And that's why I spend, I would say, the bulk of my time on there retweeting comments. I barely click that home button. I click my notifications button. I like hearing what the followers said, what was their take. And I love retweeting other people's thoughts. I think of my page almost like a bulletin board, if you will, right? It's not my words.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's this group chatting. Yeah. So through that process, you definitely are able to connect with people who, I don't think it's about like, you don't possess skills other people don't, but people who have invested the time and are willing to look into a lot of these logical issues, particularly on the COVID front.
Have you found a worthy nemesis? Like somebody worthy, not just...
Yeah, there's a lot of worthy nemesises, though. I'm trying to think of...
Like the USG or maybe Anthony Fauci or something?
Oh, you mean like
limit. Anybody?
You mean like
Anybody,
bad guys? Who are the bad guys out there?
Well, I guess
There's a whole
Who
lot
are
of
the
them.
bad guys?
I like when you said nemesis, thinking of like who is myself in the other camp. Who is very
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
pro-lockdowns.
But I just wanted to allow you to say something really big if you want.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because there are a few accounts out there who I've I don't want to say spar with because it shouldn't be a binary thing, right? Shouldn't public health be something we all want to find the truth on? Like, it's one thing when something is truly political. I don't know, take a topic like immigration or something, right? Or certain civil services that we offer. It's somewhat subjective. I support this or I don't, but it's not really a black and white issue. You can make arguments based on personal taste. Something with like a pandemic, a public health emergency, should not have broken down those lines. It shouldn't be Republicans are against this, Democrats are that. It's very unnerving to me that the public health response broke so red and blue.
Yeah.
But in that vein, there are a handful of people who are kind of on the other side who know their shit and aren't just carnival barkers and produce the data and the studies behind what they're saying. Before we get off tonight, I'll drop a name or two. I'm blanking on them right now. But yeah, I have a couple nemesis, if you will. In fact, I lobbed out there the other day, and I've been saying this for years and not out of my own arrogance, but I really mean it. I think it could be important. I would love to have a blow-by-blow over COVID topics in a live format with people listening where you can't call timeout, you don't have notes, you can't get Truman Show protection and help, and we just talk about some of these issues logically. I posted that the other day. I said, how can I make this happen? And a couple of people responded with who would be, good opponents, if you will, on the other side. And some of them are awesome. And I love that opportunity. It's not about me like winning, right? Again, it shouldn't be winning in public health. It should be what's the truth and what has been the deception. But there are some awesome accounts on the other side, awesome voices on the other side. It's definitely not a good camp, bad camp. There's just been a lot of confusing camp.
I don't see how something so impactful to so many people, like namely everyone,
right,
could not be political, though. There's no way that would not have become political.
That's a good point.
There's too much risk, and even the what's to gain by power and money is just so huge.
Right, it's all interwoven together in this big, power struggle we have going on in our country, and that's what ultimately happened. But there's some, anecdotes, if you will, that are just disturbing as hell, man. Like hearing people say that they were wearing masks so that they, quote, will not be mistaken as a Trumper. Think about that. Just think about that. So these people no longer believe this piece of cloth on their face is keeping them safe from this virus, right? But they're going to continue strapping it on just so the public around them won't think they're a Republican. Well, how the hell do we get to a point where not being in a mask, which I don't really feel like talking about mass studies, but there ain't a lot of science on the side of those loose hanging rags. How have we gotten to the point where I'm going to continue doing that as a genuflection to a political party? It's deeply disturbing. And I could come up with examples on the other end. I'm always very quick to not say no camp has a monopoly on morality. There's not the good people and the bad people. We just happen to have one camp that's in power right now versus the other. And that's why I spend a lot of time hammering them, because we only have one Truman Show serving one side. Yeah. But my point is that I could come up with just as crazy of stuff on the other end of the horseshoe. People who are doing things that make absolutely no sense in the middle of a public health emergency so they can own the libs, so they won't look like a liberal, right? And holy shit, talk about a symptom of a broken society or a sick society when a public health emergency bifurcates down those lines. I mean, that type of stuff has bothered me.
What's your read on how we got here?
COVID, you mean?
How our country's become so bifurcated and contentiously so.
That's a deep question with a lot of layers. It's funny. I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out who's behind the curtains and who's pulling levers. I figure there's people way above my pay grade who are a lot better off for that. I enjoy more sort of, again, analyzing the deception, parsing apart the truth underlying stuff and trying to figure out where that truth lies. Yeah. So it's tough in terms of like how we got here. I don't know, because I don't spend a lot of mental juice in that direction. But I will say this. It's very easy to trace back a progression over the last 2 years, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years. And when you do that, you start to see some strings that you just can't disconnect once you connect them. For example, one of the most paramount that you'll see is what I've lately been calling this religion of human rights, right? Where everything that I want, I'm going to label human rights. Yeah. And that way, if you're against it, you're abhorrent. So, I mean, I could go down multiple categories with this. We could talk about if you're not okay with Leah Thomas winning the female swimming championship, you're a transphobe. If you're not okay with critical race theory practice in your schools, you're a white supremacist. If you're not taking a vaccine that clearly science shows you don't need, you're a conspiracy theorist and an anti-vaxxer. So this idea, what I like to call the morality binary, where instead of it positioning, hey, this is a policy position I like, here are the benefits, these are the reasons why you should support it. It's this policy equals save the world and racism, whatever. And if you don't agree, you are enter term of abhorrence here, right? And you see that framework applied damn near across every front of what I call the Truman Show. And if you go back in time, American time, I mean, you can see the evolution of that occurring. And there's certain aspects of it that really jump out. Dear colleague, from Obama, that era really jumps out at me. So when you combine sort of that, everything I want is human rights and therefore I have to get my way or you're abhorrent mechanism, with the apparatus of the Truman Show that can project this faux reality, you can see how you could tie those two together and really start, social engineering, if you will. Yeah. So I see a lot of that social engineering. I don't mean I'm some seer. I just mean when I go back and analyze it, I see that going back through Trump's era, pre-Trump's era. I see it in Obama's era. And so I personally believe there is something greater going on. I don't know what it is. I, again, don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out who the wizards are pulling the cranks. But at this point, in my opinion, if you don't recognize that there is some higher level control happening, our society being artificially pushed in a direction, I think you're drunk on tribalism or your head's in the sand. I just think we have too many signs of it to dismiss it outright at this point.
I saw on Twitter, and I didn't really understand this, but because you study law, maybe you can help me with this or shoot me out of the air if I'm getting my head too far in the clouds. But somebody was saying something, maybe it was something you like, I don't know, about American law is based on rights, like the government gives you rights or grants you rights or something like that, whereas British Commonwealth law is based on jurisprudence. And the way that rights have promulgated over the course of decades and centuries, like voting rights and the civil rights and stuff, was all based on the state granting or enforcing the rights of individuals to be treated in certain ways. And you see that the state can withdraw those rights or give those rights or enforce those rights. We see with that gay wedding cake thing where the state comes to a private business and enforces this moral, what the state thinks is correct, which has been programmed into the state or whatever. So the state just has a lot more power in our system than perhaps it does in Britain, England, Commonwealth.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of familiarity with, sort of how the English system is different. But what you just said, I think, is arguably the most important categorization of like political minds in our country is, do you believe that our government and our Constitution is there to protect individual rights or natural rights that already exist? Or do you believe that the state is the creator of our rights? And that very much describes a right-left breakdown. Ben Shapiro, I don't know if you've read his book, but sorry, Ben, if I butcher this title, but five easy steps to destroy America, 5 ways to destroy America, 5 steps to destroy America, something along those lines. Love or hate Ben, that guy is absolutely brilliant, and his understanding of civics is just extraordinary. And the majority of that book is built off that exact idea of those two schools of thought. And again, it's not a right way and a wrong way. It's two different ways. But the idea is, does the government protect rights that are ours, or is the government the creator of our rights? And boy, in my opinion, our country has lurched terribly in the latter direction in a very dangerous manner. And that, of course, ties back into the human rights religion. Because if the state's a creator of rights, and now the state is going to define all these things as human rights, it almost becomes limitless. For example, Leah Thomas in the pool. Okay, is that human rights? Is it human rights that none of our daughters should have the ability to win the NCAA female swimming championship anymore? Sure doesn't equate to human rights in my book. But if our government sets that as human rights, codifies that stuff into law. It's a dangerous way to go. And it really is the final, in my opinion, perverted chapters of exactly what you and I are talking about, the government being the creator of rights versus the protector of them. I think we're seeing a very seismic shift in that regard in our country. I think COVID was mind-blowing and game-changing for way more people than talk about it at this time. I think the specter of COVID, how quickly rights were taken away, how subjective and amorphous standards were, how the people who chose them were just completely out of our own ability to control ourselves, was eye-opening as hell for a lot of people, and not just people like me who have been loudly ranting about it. I think there's a lot of concerns buried in brains that haven't come out yet of, whoa, we better rein in this federal apparatus before it's a Frankenstein we've lost control of. And that's where we are in America, in my opinion.
I jumped on one of these Twitter spaces in the wake of one of the drops of the so-called Twitter files. And there was a guy who worked for Trump when Trump got installed. And the guy was ranting or kind of just sharing what was going on when Trump got in office. When Trump got in office, Trump needed to fill 4,000 or 3,000 positions. And Trump did not have the resources to do that. So he had to make a deal with the Republicans to staff all those positions. And everybody that he staffed hated his guts because Trump did not belong within the system. The system was such that Trump never really had power or hope to actually have power because so many people that would fill these positions were actively against him, up to and including the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So
absolutely.
There is this apparatus, this federal apparatus that's granting and taking away rights, and it goes down to the states. The state governors are granting and taking away rights. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. This is a very, very big question. Maybe the $15 trillion question is, do you change the system? Can the system change? Do you just get like a DeSantis in there? Do you write policy? Do you stack the courts? Like, how do you reverse the slide into totalitarianism when there's this huge apparatus that wants nothing more than to take more and more power?
2 words, man. States' rights. That is going to be the landing place of this entire struggle, in my opinion. And it is the salve to exactly what you just asked, is the preservation of state autonomy and state rights. And of course, flip that coin over. What is being so intensely eroded? State rights. One of the clearest examples of that. And I felt like I was the only person in America even talking about this story. And that's a great example of why I've been so driven on Twitter, is this like, where the hell is the fourth estate supposed to be talking about this and sharing this with us? So go back to, I don't know, it was either early 2020 or 2021 when the mask debate in schools was raging, right? So a lot of blue governors, again, sad that it cut red blue, but it did. A lot of blue governors ordered masks in schools. So everybody's kids had to be in masks. Now, we already had data at the time that showed that was mostly placebo. The benefit of non-fitted masks is largely mental. It's a different conversation if you've got the fitted N95s, but nobody wears those, especially in schools. So we already know, for the most part, that this is a placebo effect.
Yeah.
You've got blue governors that order masks in schools. The moral thing to do is we all just have to abide by it, right? It's a legal thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. DeSantis does the opposite. He says there will be no masks in schools. Well, that's not what he said. That's what the Truman Show said. He said all mask mandates must have a parental opt-out. He gave that decision to the parents. He did that time and time again. That's why the whole state turned dark red in November. So he does that. And there were a lot of masks. I live here. I saw them. Some people wore masks, but every parent had the right to not put their kid in a mask, which in my opinion was the decision that looked out for the state, or looked out for the citizens and not, other agendas. But anyhow, Biden or down in South Florida, I think it was Brevard County, a school board decides they're just going to rebuke DeSantis's order. Now that's our law, right? We elected him to pass these laws, to be in control of our police power. So this is the democratic process in action. Our democratic process was our parents are going to have the right to opt out of a mask. This school board decides, no, we're going to require them. So now all those kids are forced to go. So DeSantis's only remedy there was to fine them. And that's precisely what he did. I want to say it was like 140,000 to one and like 70,000 to another. Joe Biden takes the podium 2 nights later from a speech and commands people to continue violating those laws in South Florida, then states that he will use federal funding to pay any fines. And that's exactly what he did. He used a grant program because I got to think it would be illegal for him to just write a check for state fines. He diverted funds from a grant program in a to the penny amount to those fines. if you think about that, if you put that all together, Benjamin, that's a scary pissing on states' rights and in turn our Constitution. Because the reality was, when you were a parent in a blue state like California that was requiring your kid to be masked, you didn't have this right? I mean, you couldn't overturn that somehow. We didn't have a federal apparatus and state grant money to overturn it. So it's like, you go back to that Truman Show and that moralizing engine. It's the moral thing to do to follow the law where the blue governors have put in masks. But in the red states where they've given the right to the parents, it's the moral thing to do to violate those same laws. And we're going to support that with the federal apparatus and our own tax dollars. I mean, that scares the hell out of me. And I wrote a thread about it that was like started with, why is this not one of the most talked about stories in America? Man, a year and a half later, I don't think 10% of our countrymen even know that happened. Nobody talks about it. Nobody reported it. That type of trampling on states' rights scares the shit out of me. Yeah. And that's why I think the West Virginia v. EPA case was a much more significant ruling for this country than Dobbs was. I know that's a hot take or not a very popular opinion. But that ruling was massive because
Could we expand on West Virginia against who?
Yeah, and West Virginia versus EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Okay. So in a nutshell, what that ruling was it was reining in the ability of the executive branch to operate on executive orders, on administrative fiat, right? We can't pass these laws. We can't get Congress to pass these emissions laws, all this net zero nonsense. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to have the executive sign executive orders. So it's quite a complicated case with some pretty deep history and facts. But in a nutshell, what SCOTUS ruled in that West Virginia v. EPA case was a limiting of that if you want to pass these kind of laws, then you need to go through our judicial branch. Hello, that's how we built our Constitution. That ruling was hated by the Truman Show, understandably, because it is by way of executive actions. It's by way of NGOs and global apparatuses that are outside of the control of the electorate. How you get this moralizing engine that comes in and says, yes, Leah Thomas will swim with girls, and if you don't like it, you're abhorrent. And I know I'm kind of muddling things together, but they all tie together in my brain. Yeah. It's all part of it's an apparatus.
Okay. Let me push against you and then ask another question. So absolutely. One, why stop at states' rights? Why not go to county rights? Why wouldn't a school board of a county be allowed to do whatever they want within the state of Florida, right? Why stop at the state?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. That was the kind of thing that the gentleman I was talking about, Steve White, and I used to drill into, is the same logical issue can apply at a lower level. So, our structure is states have police power. So those kind of decisions were reserved to, moving just to Florida, DeSantis as our governor. But you can make the exact same logical argument of, well, then why shouldn't Brevard County have the right to pass their own and contradict DeSantis, right? I don't think you can resolve that tension other than to say at some point we have to create a structure on how everything's going to operate, and we ultimately divvy things out, what we hope is in some sort of fair proportion, so that we have a system of checks and balances that'll keep things in check. Okay. But I don't think there's a logical way to defeat the question you just asked. I think the same logical tension is going to exist at the school board level, then the county level, state level, Fed level.
I could see an argument being made where you say that a certain level of power is optimal, like a certain size of power is optimal, and the state is a pretty good model based on old European countries, maybe. You say that this is something that can work as long as there's not a lot of wars between these different states, but this is probably the optimal amount of power. And then it also allows people to move outside of the state and choose the state that they want to be in, right? So they can opt into these different forms of governance because there's a confederation of these different states, but the states ultimately have authority.
And see, I think that's critical to what we're talking about here is we were designed to operate in that manner. We are the United States of America. We're not the country of America to be ruled by a monarchy. We were intended to be this collection of various states, presumably with somewhat their own cultures, somewhat their own morality and beliefs and systems and community centers and all that kind of stuff. And the reality is, play that out, it's not necessarily a bad thing that life in San Francisco is dramatically different from life in Alabama. That's really meant to be the design. That's who we were meant to be. But that is getting overrun by this high-level apparatus again. The the idea that our journosphere, our politicians, our, I hate the term because it's so overused these days, but our elites, kind of our coastal elites, have populated, almost usurped these critical channels of cultural importance from our media, journalism sphere, academia, and our universities. You add all these together, and they're almost becoming this like administrative blob that we're all forced to follow. And if you think about it, Benjamin, the last couple of years are largely the forced living San Francisco style across the greater 50, right? And I know that's put a little simplistically, but Leah Thomas is a great example of that. And maybe there's certain areas in the country where they would choose to go all out gender theory and treat people who select their own genders as if they are of that sex and blah, blah, blah. But by no means should everybody in Florida be required to do the same. But that's where we are. That's the tension, and for lack of using the corny term, that's the culture war. Right there is it's going to all fall down to state rights. Do we have the right to operate as a somewhat autonomous 50, understanding that we have some constitutional protections, some federal laws that bind those abilities, or are we going to get to a point where some sort of high-level authority or council sets the standards for everybody, and we are all forced to oblige? I think we're heading strongly in that latter direction, and I think it's very antithetical to what we were meant to be, the very design of this place.
Well, I mean, only one entity prints the money for all the states, right? Like there's an automatic centralization of power all the way down to our currency, and then there's just a lot of money involved. There's a lot of reliance, cross-reliance, and then this huge organ that is just incredibly powerful that gets to dictate all these different things. How do you break that up? How do you break away from that? How do you trim that down?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the path out, assuming we get out, and I'm not wrong here, and this isn't, I'm always quick to try to, I tend to state my positions very boldly, and it sort of comes across as if they're inherently correct. They're not inherently correct. They're inherently mine. And I present them in a strong manner, but that, again, I'm not some seer. That doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. So I'm quick to couch on the idea that the positions I put forward are just simply my thoughts and the things, the values I want to preserve, the directions I think we should go. My point in that is perhaps I'm wrong here, and perhaps the moralizing direction everything is headed is the direction America's going to head, and maybe that represents the majority of our populace, and it is what it is. I'm not dismissing that as a possibility, but I don't personally believe that's true. I don't believe a lot that has occurred in this country, particularly in the last 24 months, reflects who we are. I think there's a lot of people who are buried in the Truman Show and don't understand the realities around them. I think there's a lot of social and political pressure to conform, which is keeping a lot of conversations happening only in private quarters when they desperately need to be said out loud. And I personally, and that's part of the reason I've been on this daily Twitter crusade, is I still have faith in the American people. And I believe that if enough Americans wake up to the coercive nature of what is happening, how much there's been a marriage between one political party and spheres like media, big tech, even the universities, our health agencies, all circling their wagons around one. Now, there's a name for that, Benjamin. We call it fascism. Ironically, we hear the word all the time, but it's always swung in the opposite direction. I think if enough Americans, or when enough Americans, wake up to what is going on, they're going to say no. They're going to say no. The problem is you have to have an alternative to March. Where do you go, right? And we're stuck in this rigid binary system or bipartisan system of either DNC or GOP. I spend so much time ripping the Democratic Party and the left intentionally. It's calculated. It's because I'm trying to push back a tide. And inherently, people think, oh, that means you're this diehard Republican guy. No, I'm not. I'm undeclared on my voting card. I was much more aligned kind of center left most of my life until the last few years. The GOP is a voting vehicle to me right now and nothing more. And if the GOP were to get back in power and they were to start doing nefarious things, then I'd point my cannons their way. I'm not wearing a colorful jersey here. I'm on the train I think needs to take us where we need to be. But my point in that is they have to have an alternative to go to. I've said for a while, the most important, the most critical voting bloc in America right now are former DNC voters who are staggering away from the party like plane crash survivors. The party that they've known and loved their whole lives is not what it used to be. It's advancing things that they don't support, and they don't want to be part of it anymore. And I use staggering away from plane crash survivors because that's what they are. They're kind of lost in a field of where do I go from here? And guess what? Hold up a picture of Donald Trump. They're going to run back to the fiery plane. And that's the problem that the GOP faces right now. It's not all about Trump. I just use that because it's an easy jab, but the GOP ain't offering much of an alternative. And right now, if we were to go in political booths or voting booths tomorrow, it'd be a very easy choice for me, but not because I'm happy with the product on the right. So, in conclusion to that ramble, I do believe the American people are going to solve this problem. I don't believe the track we're being forced down represents who we are. But if we can't provide an alternative that is attractive enough to get those plane crash survivors, I'm not sure we get there. Well, and I don't see it
like
right now.
What does that look like?
I mean, this is going to sound so simple. It looks like Florida to me right now. Look at that electoral map a month ago. It's absolutely staggering. And the most critical question politically in this country is, why did the red wave happen so profoundly in Florida and not happen anywhere else? Was it something unique about the state of Florida and the people of Florida, or was it factors that were unique to 2022? And I think the answer to that question is going to answer the outcome of this culture war. Either A, there's just something in the water down here in Florida, and we're just a different state now, and we're an anomaly. That's what I'm part of this center-left group who very plugged in politically, and I learn a lot from them. And they're fully convinced of that Florida is just such an anomaly at this point, it's almost not worth the calculus, and that what you saw in most of the other states represents where we are as a nation. I personally don't believe that's true. I think the red wave that a lot of people thought were going to happen nationally did happen. It was confined to one state. And in my opinion, it was factors that were unique to 2022 that held that off, not factors that were unique to Florida. And I think the two critical ones there are the toxicity of Donald Trump and the candidates that he sponsored. They went belly up. And single women went D plus 37. I mean, chew on that number. Married men went heavily Republican. Single men, heavily Republican. Married women went heavily Republican. Single women went D37. It's hard to process a number that significant. And that's obviously largely Dobbs, right? Well, there won't always be a Dobbs. There won't always be a Donald Trump. There won't always be a year and a half of congressional hearings like a banana republic and all this propaganda. So in my opinion, those factors held off the red wave and the other 50. It's not that the red wave only occurred in one, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I still think we get there. I really do.
Yeah.
But you got to have a leader, right? Who's a leader right now? I couldn't tell you. I love DeSantis, but in my dream world, he stays as our governor.
Yeah.
Truth. I think he's in a perfect location or spot right now.
Well, you said it's not who we are. Who are we from your point of view, Theo Jordan? Who is America? I think the individual is one of the top answers to that question. I think we are a collection of the individual who has come together because we knew we could do greater things as a union, but we weren't meant to be this one amorphous blob controlled by some high level at the top. I think the individuality of us, which you can analyze at literally the individual level, like me and you as people. You can look at a household, the nuclear family, such a contentious term in today's day and age. You can look at small towns and community centers, whether they're faith-based or they're not. You can cast it up to the state level, right? I think the idea of the individual components forming a greater one is who we are. And I feel like that's largely being melded away by sort of this avalanche we're under. But I also think a lot of people's eyes opened in COVID. I think we felt that in the pandemic response. In a negative way, I mean. We felt that we lost the ability to operate as individuals. All of a sudden, we all just had to kind of succumb to that blob, which, I get the arguments the other way. What if it had been Ebola and was killing 75% of the people that got affected, right? Wouldn't we have all been a lot quicker to acquiesce? So again, I don't look at these as black and white topics. Yeah. But that's it to me. I think America is largely about the individual, and we are. I mean, you go back to how did we settle the Wild Wild West? It was through that. It was through individual efforts. I mean, my own state, we have the strongest homestead protection in the country. The reason for that is a long time ago, they told Americans, go down and fight the Indians and settle a piece of land, and we will grant it to you as your homestead.
I mean, that is the background of homestead law in the state of Florida. So I think that factor defines America as opposed to a lot of the other nations in our country. I think that's something that's really unique about us. And that makes sense because we were compiled as a quilt to the world. Like, what does somebody from Korea look like? What does somebody from China look like? What does somebody from Mexico look like, right? There's some sort of common image that pops in your head when I say each one of those. What does an American look like? There is no common image. We literally are a quilt of the world. And that's why I believe America is exceptional, which it drives me insane. People, are chafed by that comment. We were made exceptional by design. And maybe you don't like the word exceptional. We are unique. We were literally, the melting pot wasn't just some stupid term somebody came up with. We literally took a piece from this country and this country and this trade and that knowledge and this and put them all together in one pot. That's what makes us special. There's not another project on this earth that has that background.
Well, doesn't it need a common glue? Isn't there a commonality that needs to bind all these disparate entities and attitudes together? Or
100%.
Without creating a power vacuum?
Yeah, 100%. If you're going to take 100 different tribes and set them all on this common land and have them all live together and then presumably form some sort of union, you have to have something to bond over, right? And if you think about it, what is one of the what are the top things being eroded in our country socially? Patriotism, our flag, our anthem, our founders, statues being thrown in the water, red paint all over George Washington, people going after Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's just insane in 2020. Nationalism has taken on a tone in our society as if you are like, I don't know, some like far-right militia member if you believe in nationalism. What ultimately is nationalism? It's pride in your nation, right? It's considering yourself a national citizen. I don't consider myself a global citizen. I consider myself an American citizen. And if you go down the list of all the things that I just talked to you about, founders, flag, anthem, patriotism, nationalism, even look at sports. I was writing about this a lot during the World Cup because it drove me insane. You hop on CNN every morning. They couldn't write an article about the World Cup that had to do with sports for their life. Everyone was about the workers that died in the stadiums that were built and LGBTQ rights and oppression and this and that and the other. There is this strong push to politicize even sports, because if you think about it, sports are one of those arenas where all those divisive factors melt away. If you ever look at stands on a Saturday afternoon in Blacksburg, Virginia at a big Hokies game, it's just a sea of Americans. You can't really even tell who the individuals are. They're all just in the school's colors, right? Those are your bonds. And every one of those that I just listed has been under massive attack in this, what I call leftist cultural takeover. Because if you can, let's look at it both ways. You just said you need some sort of common bond in order for all those tribal elements to hold. Absolutely you do. And if you were to build something strong out of those elements, what would be the way you would destroy it? You would solidify the melting pot, chop it back up into its individual components, tribes, right? You could call that intersectionality. You start amplifying the ways that categories, tribes, demographics, what do they have in different? What are they in competition over? Instead of us all going to the football game in red, white, and blue jerseys, now we're talking about this immutable and that immutable. And then you get those camps to turn at each other. Might even call it cultural appropriation. No, you can't make a dumpling cookbook. You're not Asian. No, you can't wear a sombrero on Cinco de Mayo. You can't even celebrate it because you're not Mexican. What did we just do? We just turned the street that had the Korean, the Mexican, the Canadian, this guy, and this guy, and they were all friends. They were all going to the game. They were all, yay, America. Now they're all fighting about skin color and eye color and religion and gender, and they won't even go to the game anymore. So, I
love the...
I don't even know what you asked me.
I love the pride flag and its increasingly gaudy permutations as a representation of people falling away from unity into increasing disparity under the flag of diversity.
Under the flag. LGBTQIA 2S plus 2 infinity. I mean, it's crazy. One of the most chilling pictures I've seen, and I've posted it so many times in the last few months, is pictures of our military marching to the pride flag. There's no American flag. It's not like there's an American flag and a pride flag, which I'm, not a huge fan of. I don't think either. But you've got troops marching to a flag that isn't America. I mean, that's it. That's it right there in your face. It's a tangible example of exactly what we're talking about here. And it ultimately serves the function of eroding those bonds, let's call it the red, white, and blue, as corny as that sounds. That is a bond we can all share and be one and be in America. But if you want to destroy America, how would you do it? I just described it. Tribe them back up, chop them up, and put them at each other's throats. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you tell me that's not where we are in American society over the last 2 years. And in my opinion, it's impossible to dismiss the intent, the design. I use that word a lot. I see a design. So many of these different components tie together, even though they shouldn't. Greatest example of that is queer gender theory and race. What do they have to do with each other? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. What does skin color have to do with gender theory? Nothing, right? But they're all now the same thing. I always post this one article. I wish I knew his last name. Keith something or other, wrote it on CNN. And the article's title was like something along the lines of, what lessons I would need to teach my white son or something like that. I mean, just this really intense, heavy racial line. So it pulls you in on this as a race article. But as you read through the article, it's largely about LGBTQ plus stuff. Talks about gender. He uses the word cis heteronormative. He uses queer. He talks about Christian, vilifies Christian a couple times in that article. This was a CNN piece. Tie that all together and what do you see, right? What do any of those descriptions or issues or categories have to do with race? Nothing. But what do they have to do with? This tribaling, this chopping society back up into components that are against each other. It's impossible not to see that design in modern society, in my opinion.
Oh, so from the other point of view, how do you resist that without becoming tribal yourself? Are you kind of wary or disgusted or eye-rolly about different attacks against this stuff? And what are bad examples of how to go against it?
Well, to address one point you made, yeah, I'm quite wary of that. That what's the old quote? Staring into the abyss too long and become the monster thing. I've been worried about that for a long time because I swim in the same cesspools every single day. For example, when it comes to COVID, I've just been reading bad stuff, almost daily and nightly, just diving in all these different directions, and I tend to go in the same few directions. So sure, I worry about that influence. I think it's human nature that that's going to ultimately influence anybody. I think the key to staying away from that is saying the things you're going to piss your followers off. And follower is such a corny word because you don't have to be on Twitter with followers, but your crowd, your friends, your family, your peers, whatever. If you find yourself in constant agreement, there's probably something artificial going on. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to speak words that they know are going to rile up people that they like or people that they want to like them. And if you slip into that, you're done. The way you sharpen your blades is to be willing to say the things are going to piss off your followers. I ripped Trump's ass coming out of the midterms, not because I hate Donald Trump. In fact, I'm appreciative for the curtains he pulled back in our country. I think history is going to describe his presidency much different than we're all forced to talk about it today. But it was very clear to me on the morning of 11/9 that there's no value left for the GOP in that man, that he's fair or not been turned too toxic. And I wrote a lot about that the week after 11/9, and it pissed a lot of my followers off because a lot of them are big Trump people. I've got a thread where I talk about how I handle the gender theory issue. How do I handle pronouns? I've reposted that a lot. And in that, I talk about how I would use pronouns in certain situations. And I mentioned Buck Angel, who I have great respect for. And I talk about how if I was ever at a bar and a buddy came and he was with Buck, I would call Buck he. Not because I think Buck is a male. In fact, Buck doesn't think he's a male, but because out of respect for him, because I like him. What am I going to do? Go out of my way to be an asshole just so I can win some principle point for myself? So it's just sort of laying out a framework of how I approach it. These are the lines I'm going to draw. These are the ways I'm going to raise my kids. These are not things you're required to subscribe to, no matter how much pressure you're under. And here's the way that I do it. And let me tell you, Benjamin, I get trashed by my own followers every time I retweet that thread because some folks in, quote, my camp have gone so militant with their own thinking that I'm selling out and I'm feeding the great leftist beast by, using pronouns in any situation. It's idiocy, in my opinion, because go back to that bar, what value are you getting out of refusing to use a male pronoun with Buck? It's not, he's not demanding that on you. So anyhow, I think it's important to do that. I mean, that's the only way out of this malaise is if everybody stops tribing up so hard only being willing to speak with people who agree with what they're going to say, friendly audiences, if you will, and being unwilling to voice unpopular opinions. There are so many people who are holding beliefs inside of them that they passionately believe in, but they feel they're not allowed to say. And that scares me. I think that's a really bad thing for our society. And we got to get away from that. I don't know how we do it, but if we can get those people talking to each other again and shed the fringes and stop getting the center left to feel like they've got to placate the far left fringe for high fives and acceptance, stop getting the center right to feel like they got to do the same on the right end of the horseshoe. There's about 85% of us in the middle. But for some reason, we spend every day, all day talking about the 15.
Yeah. Well, they're interesting. So
they are. They are. Yeah.
They pull the eyes. They're the the car crash. Oh, you just
exactly.
want a rubber neck.
The slow motion train wreck. Yeah.
Well, do you consider yourself a dreamer?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I both have a lot of dreams. I have a very hyperactive brain that I just can't shut off. I shake my feet when I sleep. But yeah, I dream big. I love to think, man. I smoke a lot. I like to stay up late and read stuff and smoke stuff and think about stuff. And doing that, sure, I have a lot of visions of things I'd love to see. I mean, I don't know. I guess dreamer is really the wrong word. I don't wake up every day with a burn of like, I need to go take the congregation forward. You know what I mean? I don't have that kind of drive of dreamer of like, hey, I'm going to go start this community center because I need to do this amazing thing.
Yeah.
But I guess I think of a lot of good ideas. I have good visions. I'm not as good at executing on them.
Well,
I think better than I act.
Yeah. But thinking of Theo Jordan, like, what would you dream to build through this vehicle, this persona? Like, what do you see that you could do? What do you want to do with him?
We're talking like perfect world stuff.
Yeah. Like if you could do anything with him, what would you want to do?
Like I said, when I started this endeavor, I didn't have any plans for it. It was literally, I felt like I needed to do something. One of the corniest things I'll ever say, but it's true. I remember I saw Dad at a protest in 2020. He was holding up a sign that said, I had to be able to tell my children I did something. Corny as hell, but I never got that line out of my head. It was powerful for me. And that kind of was a brain worm I never got out of my head. That is what got me starting this account. So when I started doing it, I didn't want to do anything with it. That's why I've stayed anonymous. I had no interest in bridging into myself. I truly did want to see if I could contribute both to help push this tide back and, to be honest with you, so that I could tell my kids I did something. But fast forward 2 years, and honestly, Benjamin, it has all really clicked with me. I'm not going to necessarily say I always enjoy it. There's a lot of times I get tired of writing about the same topics over and over, but I feel like they're important. But I do enjoy the process. It all feels like a puzzle to me. I'll see a new headline come out of New York Times, blah, 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 something with COVID. Sounds great for whatever agenda they're trying to push. I love to drill down into that. Okay, they're saying it came from a study. What study? Let's go read the study. Oh, they're saying it's his results. What results? Let's go look at the results. And then I really enjoy explaining what I've found to others. And so that's kind of what I do every day. And in a perfect world, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd love to do this every day. I enjoy it. I don't know if it'd be a writing aspect, a speaking aspect. I think we are going through radical shifts in the media environment. I thought it was so cool to see a picture the other day of Glenn starting his own TV studio. I thought it was just a very tangible
Glenn
example.
Beck or Glenn Lowry?
No, Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn Greenwald. Okay. There's
yeah.
So many Glens.
Yeah, there are a lot of Glens. There's a lot of good Glens. I've read Glenn's stuff for a while. I think he's a very important voice right now. And he just started his own thing. Pardon me, I don't know what it's called, but he posted a picture of him sitting in his own studio. And I just thought that was so cool. It was like, and you as well, what you do, there's this, new media that is really taking over our country. And we're getting to a point where I think a critical mass of people now trust some random accounts on Twitter more than they do every ABC network on their TV. That's a profound moment in society when that happens. So in a perfect world, if I could do something with what I'm doing, I would love to be able to, really be like a citizen journalist, to be able, a reporter, to be able to dig in on some of these things the rest of the world isn't, and kind of do what I do every day. But to be honest with you, it seems a bridge too far to me. I don't really have those plans. I plan on continuing to practice law and tweet like a madman.
Well, I mean, it's kind of goes back to whatever it was about being an 8th grade teacher It's the same kind of thing. You're taking information and you're kind of distilling it down into something that somebody scrolling through at an 8th grade level, reading level, whatever, can like pick up on and understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And back to when we were chatting about that, I get a lot of fulfillment out of this. And I lack that in my Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Now, I run my own practice. So I have my own business, which has been a dream my whole life. I've had an entrepreneurial flame since I was a young kid. So don't get me wrong. I'm very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. And in many ways, the job I currently have is truly a life dream come true. So I'm not complaining that I'm like unhappy in my job. But my point is the actual widgets that this office produces every day are not something I have a passion for, right? They're just widgets. They're legal widgets that need to be produced. I have a lot of passion for what I'm doing on the bird every day. Yeah. And the amount of feedback I'm getting is just incredible. I mean, to interact on a weekly basis with somebody like Wilfred Riley, who I've read for years, and he didn't even know who I was a year ago, has been very fulfilling and motivating for me. And it's also kind of made me realize that it would be an amazing thing to do in a full-time capacity. I think the legacy media network that we have in this country is in the process of a collapse, and I don't see it recovering. Now, I'm not telling you like CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN are all just going to go, but I think the decline they're going through right now is not temporary. I think there is a massive loss of trust from the audience, from the national audience. I think we're getting close to a point where maybe a majority of Americans now recognize that what CNN and NBC tell them may not be true. Maybe I'm off on that. But I think it's getting to a big number. And all of those people are still hungry for information and content. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to studios like Glenn's. They're going to go to podcasts like yours and people who are writing blogs. So there seems to be an opportunity. And if something were to happen, it would truly be a dream come true because, back to like we talked about with teaching, I get a fulfillment here. That feedback I get from followers of, you've really helped me. So many people have said the line to me in direct message or something that I brought them a comfort at a time when they felt really alone. Now, we're talking largely in COVID, right? When I was talking about natural immunity, when we were made to believe it was a right-wing conspiracy theory, when we were talking about data that nobody else was allowed to talk about, people were getting suspended for, a lot of people thought they were going crazy because everybody around them was in this one groupthink, and they were so radically different. And so many people have thanked me that the information I was giving them at the time really helped them not feel crazy and not feel alone. And boy, there's a lot of value there, Benjamin. That really does energize me inside. So I'd love to be able to figure out a way to do this full time. And it's happening at a neat time, but I don't know. It kind of feels like something you'd have to go all in and invest on, and I don't see that happening.
But baby steps, you go from Twitter threads to a Substack to a podcast guest to, you just kind of work your way up and get your name out there. The thing about the transition from mainstream to citizen journalism, it depends a lot upon prestige, and the mainstream has tons of prestige and a lot of connections too. They have a lot of connections that citizen journalists don't quite have yet. But as you see the transition in public attention toward the citizen journalist, what I see is that people are starting to rely, they're investing their trust on individuals. Rather than CNN or New York Times or Washington Post or Fox News, they're Barry Weiss, Joe Rogan, these individuals start to pop up and they get prestige, and then they kind of form, these intellectual dark webs, where they kind of, they start to kind of reformulate something that's similar that can do the same amount of work, maybe eventually as a staffed newsroom, maybe not with, you'd have to figure out fact checkers, you'd have to hire people, there'd be a lot of money, video editors and all that stuff. So it's a possible transition, and we've had to rely on these major corporations, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, in order to exist. Like my existence depends heavily on YouTube and to a certain lesser extent, Twitter. And Twitter I can trust a little bit more right now because with Elon coming in and kind of disrupting it. So we'll see what happens there. But YouTube's a black box and they can suspend me at any time. And they are in the pocket of the mainstream and they do promote the mainstream. And so we'll see if the citizen journalists, if the audience itself can let's just say, if the audience can correct Disney, right?
Yeah.
In a way, if enough people can complain and just not watch this crap that Disney's been producing for the last 5 years, and probably will be producing for at least the next 5 years, that Disney itself changes, that YouTube itself changes, we can see maybe that's one vector. Or if Elon will create a cascade of individual CEOs saying, yeah, let's clean this place up. It actually, people want this other kind of not centralized, not completely curated media. And then on the political level, if that then starts to stock up the government with a different kind of attitude towards its citizenship. Because I think that the federal government despises Americans. I think that they truly despise us backwards, unwashed masses. And their job, from their point of view, is to rule the world. And they are all experts, and they trust the process. They don't trust the individual at all. They trust the process, right?
Sure,
and they're selected to be people who trust the process.
Yeah, and it's all kind of the lens you look at that through too, right? Did that happen organically, or is that all part of the coercive system? You know, nothing bothers me more than that word you just used, experts. That word is so abused in our time. It's unbelievable, man. Everything that they want is experts, and everything that we want is disinformation. Mm-hmm. And it's a scary reality for all of us when you can get it there, because, you know, we saw this profoundly throughout COVID. A lot of people don't realize that Pfizer and Reuters are the same thing. They're run by the same people. The people on the boards, they're just plug and play between the two of them. Yeah. So every time you'd see a fact check on that quote news outlet, it was really just a sales pitch for Pfizer, but it was the experts. And that's the term I came up with, the temple of sanctimony, where you had these people who were fully convinced the science was on their side. You know, for a long time, I almost didn't hate the people who were attacking us all as anti-vaxxers, because I almost couldn't blame them. Like, how were they supposed to think any different? They're supposed to trust some random dude with the supernova on his picture on Twitter over the CDC and the federal government and all that. Yeah. And that was all through that like expert class coercion. That idea scares me. The media thing you said, I mean, there's two ways they can kind of shut that down, unfortunately. Number one is you just discredit it in the court of public opinion, which they've done a great job of already. It's only been the last 3 or 4 months where we can really even talk about these other channels in the COVID realm. Prior to that, it was like, oh, that came from that guy? Well, you disregard it. He's a disinformation specialist. And then just the sheer level of top-level control they have. You know, I heard Colin Wright lost his PayPal and his Etsy for his roles on gender. I mean, you talk about, you know, your livelihood and your work here goes through those channels. Well, tomorrow, if they decided they didn't like what Benjamin Boyce said, you may not be able to do that anymore.
Bye-bye.
That's scary, man. Yeah. Have you been hit like that before? Have you been sanctioned? I know you've been suspended individually.
I fly under the radar, but every once in a while they remind me. Every once in a while they like put a little thing on my channel, like
because you're such a menace to our society. Dude.
I am. I'm a terrible person, man. I'm the Antichrist in a certain respect. So if you did, so right now, principally Twitter, but if you start to dream, like how are you going to expand? Have you started to dabble in long form content? Have you started to think about, you know, forming something a little bit more prestigious, like a institute maybe, or, you know?
Yeah, so not as prestigious as an institute, but yeah, I mean, I've had some of those thoughts. You know, again, I had no plans when I started, but about a year into it, I realized it was all just really clicking. It was like, you know, back to that BBS I ran back in the day. It's like, okay, this is really catching fire and it's working. I'm enjoying it. It's kind of taken off. And so around that time, I started thinking, is there something more I'd like to do? But my MO has always been getting the word out, not self-promotion, right? I haven't made a dime off all this. In fact, it doesn't even tie to my real me. So I analyzed it all in that vein. The message I'm trying to get out, would it be more valuable to do it in another medium? So I did finally start writing on Substack. I don't know, I wrote a dozen or so pieces over there. I like not being confined by the words, but to be honest with you, it's frustrating to write in that format for me, mainly because I feel this obligation to go polish it up and make it perfect. And I'm not here for that. I don't want to impress you guys that I'm some great writer. Yeah. I want to tell you something.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if I write something on Substack and 600 people read it, but I can write a thread on Saturday morning and 50,000 people read it, it seems to not achieve the goal of getting the message out. Yeah. One of the reasons that I came here today is that I feel speaking potentially can help get the message out to a level that tweets can't. I've been pressed a ton over the last year to write a book. A lot of people, including some people I really respect, including some people who have written books themselves, have told me I should write a book. I don't know, man. I've thought about it. I've already written several of them on Twitter. It would just be a matter of organizing those thoughts. It just seems like a stale medium to me. You spend all this time, and I would assume money to get a book put together. You release it, and how many people read your book? 400, 500, 800? Who cares, right?
You know, I have to push back against the self-promotion thing. I mean, I understand it. I guess I do dabble, but just like allowing yourself to be a bit of a personality, you know, like Dr. Rollergator or something like that. He's an extreme example, but allowing the audience to know you as a character, like just kind of allowing that. I know it's a temptation thing. It's a deal with the devil, you know, but you also, there's attraction there and a attraction there that if you just allow yourself to be a little bit more personable. You're greatly personable, but I mean, like a little bit more of a personality, you know, like Brett Weinstein comes to mind. Love him or hate him, he's a person, he's a character. He's got like a tone of voice and a way of thinking and stuff. He also runs a podcast. He also has, you know, voice work. He's got like this mythical origin story with the whole evergreen thing, you know, so he's got a lot of character stuff going on there. It's a double-edged sword, but I don't think you need to worry about it if you're having fun with that. And that's another domain where you can, you know, do a little self-expression and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. Honestly, things are kind of up in the air. Coming here tonight was a big step, to be honest with you.
I know. A little baby
you
step.
You sent me a direct message. I want to say it was over a year ago.
It was a while ago.
And invited me to come on here. And I've never had the chance to tell you, but I was absolutely floored because you were one of that dozen or so people of who I read your Twitter page every day before I had an account, before you knew who I was. And it was quite an honor to feel like, okay, I've contributed something to the level that this guy I really respect would be willing to have me on his world, his baby, to come chat with me. So I really appreciated that. And when you sent me another message a few weeks ago, I kind of realized it was time. So maybe I expand from here, you know, I don't know. It's just never been about me. It's been about getting this message out. Yeah. But I am sort of at a crossroads now because I have a very addictive personality. I always have. I've talked about my journey with alcoholism on the Bird several times. I quit drinking entirely 4 years ago. I have an addictive mentality. And so I spend way too much time on Twitter and it's sucking away from other areas of my life. It's all been worth it. I have no regrets. I've met some amazing people. I feel like I've contributed to the pushback, which is that cheesy sign. I can tell my kids I did something. So I have no regrets at all. But I am sort of at a point where either A, I probably need to do something more with this, or B, I may need to stop doing it. Because just like I couldn't be a moderate drinker, I'm not sure I can be a moderate tweeter. I think I either go hardcore like I do, or I pull the plug. So I don't know. We'll see what the future holds. I feel like if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. And if it's not, I got a pretty good gig as it speaks. So we'll see what happes.
I need to.
Why did you want me on your show, if you don't mind me asking? I've long wondered that.
Let me cough. These goddamn nicotine pills or lozenges. I should, you know, but you got me all excited. I'm like, I need a little nicotine to calm down here.
You've seen me vaping, so I won't criticize you.
I'll answer your question. I just need to prep for the camera so it doesn't look like I'm crying. I only want to cry.
That lozenge kicked your ass, man.
Women.
Those should have a warning label.
They should. Spicy. Yeah. Well, you're articulate and spirited. You come on hot, but you're good people. I can just tell. I mean, that was the thing, you know? You know, I love, well, I mean, my entire job is to run a place where interesting people can, especially interesting people who are unknown, get exposure and get to
I love that about you.
Be human beings. You're right. So I'm less concerned with any given topic than I am with the human condition and how the human condition intersects with that topic. So it's really personality, lived experience based content for whatever that's worth. And I just could tell them, like, this is a guy I could get along with. You know, like, this
I appreciate
is a guy,
that.
He needs to put his mouth where his tweets are. See what happens.
Well, your message that night provided a lot of fuel in the tanks. It was very inspirational for me. So I appreciate that. Whatever gut read you had said I should reach out to that guy. I'm glad you did. It was kind of a transformational moment for me when I realized, okay, maybe this is something bigger than just random tweets I'm firing off every day. Yeah. So you were an important building block.
Well, I'm glad to facilitate that. And are you a gamer? Speaking of addictive,
I haven't played in years and years because my
What's
kids
your
came and
hobby,
ate my
then?
video games. Right now, my passion's sports. I'm a sports fanatic.
Oh, yeah?
Miami Hurricanes football guy. I watch football, fantasy football. I'm watching sports pretty much every night. So one of my biggest passions is sports. Prior to having children, yes, I loved gaming. I've been a gamer my whole life. Law school killed gaming. I haven't picked gaming up since then, just because I haven't had time. And when my kids get a little older, I plan on diving headfirst back into RPGs because I love role-playing games. But in all honesty, right now I do nothing but work and family and my kids and my wife. And my wife and I will go out and play golf. Golf is my meditation.
Oh, wow.
Get away from the world.
Yeah.
Don't have a lot of hobbies right now, man. My hobbies are 9 years old and 4 years old.
Yeah. Those are wonderful hobbies to have.
They are. Yeah, they mean the world to me. My kids have centered everything, man. I'm such a different human being today than I was 9 years ago. It's hard to remember who I was a decade ago.
Yeah.
They're the center of everything.
Have you thought about the legal remedies to this problems that we brought up? And are there things that, or have you thought of kind of doing some sort of regular pay attention to this case, pay attention to this case, pay attention to this case kind of thing?
No, not particularly. My legal work, for lack of a better word, hasn't really gravitated towards all these things I rant about on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think there are legal pushbacks that can occur, particularly on like the leftist scripture in our schools issue. The COVID thing is tough, man. The COVID thing is really tough. There's a piece of law. Again, these are those things that nobody talks about. They used OSHA to force vaccines on millions of people who never needed them, as we all know. And then they went and removed the injury reporting requirement from the same OSHA code when they implemented that. So if people were getting injured by the vaccines, they wouldn't be reported. I mean, it's that type of stuff that should just scream out that something is wrong. Yeah. But anyhow, back when I was reading about that, I forget who it was, but some guy and I were chatting about something late night. We got digging into some code that they came up with. I want to say it was in September of 2021. And I wish I knew what area law it was in. I should have known that tonight. But they built law that basically says, even if it comes out later, that Pfizer intentionally, or Big Pharma in general, intentionally misled with their marketing, they cannot be sued. There's immunity right in the code, man. So
can that be reversed?
I don't see much legal coming out of the whole COVID disaster at all.
It can't be reversed. I mean, like in Nuremberg, like if Nazi Germany says that it's okay to do what it does, and then a greater power comes through and firebombs Dresden,
right?
And then submits them to a higher law. Yeah, so it would have to be like a catastrophic rearrangement of the powers that be.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to totally undo that law, and then in that case, it may not even be retroactive. What was so chilling to me about that, though, is think about the design of that. Right? Somebody in a room sat around and said, we need to create some law to make sure Big Pharma can't get sued for injuries, even if we find out they were lying in their marketing. I mean, what kind of conversations were happening and who was having them? Those kind of things drive me insane.
Well, you know what? The really scary thing is that the fact of the matter is that Pfizer wrote those laws, and all of our laws aren't written by the people we vote for. They're written by lobbyists who write all the laws and then get signed off on. And COVID's just one thing, but it's the entire system. Par for the course. And the scary thing is, man, again, I spend so much time slapping at one side, right? So let's say the tides reverse completely, and all of a sudden the GOP just storms back into all the branches in DC. You think anything's changing with Big Pharma collusion? I don't at all. I think all the people in the red jerseys are just as bought by them as all the people in the blue jerseys. Where does that leave us? When Scott Gottlieb is on the Biden COVID task force and he's being paraded around every night on TV, not introduced as Pfizer board member Scott Gottlieb, but former FDA commissioner Scott Gottlieb, we have big problems in this country. You know, and I want to see a politician run on an explicitly anti-Big Pharma platform. I am the anti-Big Pharma candidate. I'd vote for that guy. Yeah. I'd say that a little facetiously, but we have, big problems with lobbying. One of the Pauls float your boat, like Rand Paul? Or
I like Rand Paul a lot. I'm a little ignorant towards him in terms of like what his ultimate platform is if he were to be on a ticket to be our leader. You know, I don't know as much of him as I should, but I am very impressed by him. He strikes me as probably the most honest person in Washington, not named Bernie Sanders. I'm not a fan of Sanders or any of his ideology, but I think he's like the most honest person in DC. The guy just tells you what's on his mind, even if he thinks you're going to hate it. I wish we had more politicians who did that. Yes, big fan of Rand Paul. I mean, when was some of the only time we've seen honesty throughout all of COVID? When Paul had Fauci under oath in Congress. And Fauci damn near melted on the stand. That's where he lost his marbles and said, I am the science, and criticizing me is the science.
He said that. I missed that.
He did. He said he is the science, and to criticize him is to criticize science itself.
Oh, wow.
True story. From the stand. And that's simply because he was being boxed in with logical questions. It's not like Rand Paul showed up with the spell book, right? It was just, this doesn't make sense. Explain it to me. And that's kind of been the thing I've said over and over, and the stuff I've put out there on COVID is, guys, all it takes here is logical analysis. This stuff cannot withstand basic logical scrutiny. The problem is we're not allowed to scrutinize it. We kind of are now, but we weren't for a year and a half.
A little bit. I just got flagged. One of my videos just got flagged for COVID misinformation or vaccine misinformation. There was none in there. There was none in there. It was just a woman said that she didn't take it, and her family was totally crushed financially because of that choice that they made.
Yeah, and yet the part of Team Biden can take the podium and say, you're just going to need one shot. It will protect you for the whole year. Day later, they say, if we can get everybody vaccinated, it will prevent every single death. No, it won't. It's like medical misinformation is perfectly fine as long as that medical misinformation serves the cause.
What's your read on the Biden regime? It just doesn't make any sense. Like they're incompetent, and then they're lying to your face, and you're like, what are we supposed to do? Are you guys mocking us? Are you just ridiculing us at this point?
Right. It's like a giant episode of Punk'd that won't end. You know, one of the most unnerving moments for me in the last 2 years was the Inflation Reduction Act, and the way, not the law, the way that the law was passed, the way that the law was packaged and presented. Not only were we told that it was going to reduce inflation, in fact, they called it the Inflation Reduction Act. But if you remember, they trotted out like their team of 15 Nobel Prize winning economists who are going to tell us all these different ways it's going to come down. It wasn't 12 hours after the passage of that law, which was the largest climate spending bill in U.S. history, that not a single outlet in the Truman Show called it the Inflation Reduction Act anymore. It was a spending bill. And we were all, yay, what great progress from Joe. He passed such great legislation. It's like, dude, what happened to the inflation reduction from 12 hours ago? And politicians lie, right? We label bills funny things. But it's different when you're marching out. Team Biden is marching out these 15 experts, because now what it does is it tells their base that what we're telling you is true. We have Nobel Prize winning people confirming it. So if any of those disgusting, abhorrent right-wingers tell you it's going to cause inflation, you don't need to listen to them. That's clearly disinformation. Our experts have told you. And the scary thing is, man, they did the same thing with Build Back Better. I have one thread where I've clipped like the news articles. It's the same movie played twice. And America didn't care. You know, I mean, even in that channel I was invited in, I was invited in a channel of people from the center left who are obviously very plugged into politics. I learned a ton from them. I'm very honored that they've let me be part of their discourse, but that didn't bother them, Benjamin. It didn't bother them, that lie, because the legislation was achieved. And like, holy cow, man, you know, we can't get to the point that we're just being bald-faced lied to. I mean, the Department of Energy, there's a clip I've posted over and over where they were asking her, like, when gas prices are going through the moon, what are you going to do about it? And she literally can barely get the words out of her mouth. She's like choking on her own words as she talks about clean hydrogen and net zero. She does not believe the words coming out of her own mouth. I mean, I get exasperated sometimes of like, what's it going to take, guys? What's the trigger for everybody when enough people say enough is enough?
Well,
I don't know, because they've got to prioritize it over likes and elections, and no one wants to do it.
Oh, yeah. It's not just that people care. It's that people who matter care. And that's the problem.
Bingo.
The people who matter don't care.
Yeah. And okay, fair enough. And I agree with that. The people who matter don't care. And in terms of the camp that I'm slapping at all the time, the people who matter haven't even begun the pushback at the public surface, right? But can you not look at it the other way too? If there was enough pushback underneath, grassroots pushback, if you were, wouldn't the upper brass have to respond? And what I mean by that is part of that center-left group that I'm part of. Every one of them in that channel believes that what is happening with gender theory in our schools is wrong. And they'll say that in that channel. They don't think gender theory should be pushed on kids. They think it's gotten out of control. They recognize that there's an issue with leftist activism in the party, but none of them will say that publicly. And in about a week before the election, I don't know if you remember this, but Governor Kelly was getting a ton of shit for being supportive of transactivism and gender theory, primarily, boys and girls sports in school. So she ran a commercial. And in that commercial, the opening line was, men should not be in girls sports. We all know that, right? That was the bone that her base needed to hear to be able to go cast a vote for her next week, that she's not a leftist radical. The problem is that message isn't going to go over well with the leftist radicals, is it? The trans activists. That battle has not even been initiated yet. That internal housekeeping that needs to take place between the establishment and the reasonable people on the left and these fanatical leftist activists who clearly were given the keys in 2020 has not even begun. No one at the public surface is willing to fire that first shot. Between you and I think it's because they know the level of damage it's going to cause in the short term. So my point in this whole ramble, Benjamin, was the day after she runs that commercial, she puts out a public statement where she says, all we meant in that commercial was men, adult men. Of course, adult men shouldn't be in kids' sports. In terms of transgender people in sports, we need to take that on a case-by-case basis. So what did she just do? She sent the message to the general public, so they'll all go vote for her. I'm not into this leftist activism. Then she turned around and threw a bone to the radicals and said, wink, wink, I'm on your team, right? So they've managed to keep those two camps together. And when that phrase, the DNC in its current incarnation, is done. They're going to have to radically transform what they are as a party, or I don't see them having a future there. My point in sharing all that with you is I find that level of deception to be so bad and dangerous for all of us that nobody should be okay with that, even if it favors your camp. And man, the people in that channel that I'm talking about, who I respect the hell out of, by the way, these are like good, intelligent, good people. They didn't seem to have an issue with that. In fact, one of them has referred multiple times to Laura Kelly really did a good job of delivering the message that's needed on that issue. Man, that really terrifies me, because what he's basically saying is, I got to give her some credit for misleading everybody so well. She did a damn good job of that. And I don't know. I feel like no matter what color jersey you wear, you shouldn't be okay with that. Because if we get to the point where the largest climate spending bill in history can be called inflation reduction, where does the line get drawn? It seems like we've just given up on those lines. And when the same people who want the power to censor our information for our, quote, safety are so willing to bald-faced lie to us, got a big problem. Right? I don't know how we solved that one. A lot more Benjamin Boyce podcast.
We can give up in despair. Is that an option?
We can't do that. I'm telling you, man,
we can't do that.
Once enough people hear it, we are going to turn this ship around. One of the cheesiest things I ever wrote on that platform. I wrote this. I'm going to read it again just to be extra cheesy.
Yeah.
I said, what are you doing over there, man? Chopping that tree down. But you can't do that. The tree's ginormous, and you're just a dude on Twitter. Yeah, I know. But if I keep delivering blows, eventually people are going to wonder why. Then they're going to come over and find out why, and they're going to join. And with enough small axes, that big tree comes down? Yes. That's it. That's the MO right there. I do truly believe if we open enough eyes, if enough people grab that small axe, Truman Show's coming down. A lot of people think I'm naive and stupid for being optimistic there.
Yeah, but it makes for a good Smurf episode.
It does. It sure does. It sure does. There's a famous song, by the way, called Small Axe. Do you know who sings it?
Is this by Rush?
Bob Marley.
Oh.
Bob Marley, Small Axe. Now, if you think of the struggle where Bob came from, you can understand the message of Small Axe. It's a similar message. I don't know why
Jamaica's doing great now.
Yeah.
They came out ahead of that one. Yeah. Actually, I don't know. I don't mean
that's my MO. If I had to put my MO on a plaque, that's it right there, man. Just keep banging at that tree, and eventually people are going to come over and ask why. And let me tell you, I think we've got evidence that that's worked on COVID. Now, I recognize that there's a lot of people still lost in the abyss, but I no longer think it's a critical mass. I think the majority of people in America now realize that things were not above board and that they have been misled. I don't mean they're like as far in the spectrum as I am, but they're not in the 100% blind, we're doing the right thing, just trying to save lives, and all you guys who disagree, you're all abhorrent anti-vaxxer assholes. I think that has very much changed, and I think it's going to continue to, and that's the I had to do something to tell my kids thing, man, right? I do feel like I've helped contribute to that. Now, I'm a small player. There's some other people. Alexander Marinos. I love that guy. That guy writes amazing threads, has produced a ton of information, and he's a pretty small player in the bigger scene. Jay Bhattacharya, who I'm sure I just destroyed the pronunciation of his last name. I have such respect for that man. You know, when I was sharing that quote earlier where I said a lot of my followers have thanked me for being somewhere they could go, they didn't feel so alone. Jay's been that to me. I mean, the stuff he's put out is so sensible, it's so logical, and it contradicted what we were being told so profoundly. It was people like that, my experts, who really gave me the confidence to continue digging in the directions and being willing to block out the noise. Because, man, there was a lot of noise. I mean, there was a point we barely could discuss these topics. Yeah. We just got destroyed all around us. So that's that spread awareness, open eyes thing, you know?
Even if the tree starts falling tomorrow, it's got a long way down, but it's not.
It does.
I mean, yeah, so we'll see.
The biggest concern, I mean, one of the biggest concerns I have is the university system. I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I don't see a solution for us there right now. I think the only solution that can come is from demand flowing up. If enough parents quit sending their kids to schools that have now prioritized leftist activism over education, those schools would be forced to change or go out of business. But whereas I'm seeing that transformation occur sort of in the court of public opinion, if you will, in the COVID arena, I'm not seeing it on the leftism and academia issue at all. I think even if we started really reversing course today, we're probably a decade or two out from seeing material change there. And I'm not sure we have momentum built up for a change of course there right now.
Yeah, that's
there might be little pockets of Twitter like ours.
Well, there's a university bubble coming eventually where these degrees are basically worthless, especially compared to how much they cost. So there's that level and stuff. But and I covered the leftist university thing for a while. I just got kind of bored with it because it's just this huge behemoth, and they just keep on doing their thing. Yeah. You know, and kicking
how does it end, though? Does it just keep spinning off in that ideological abyss, or do you see it turning around? And if so, what's the time frame on that? Is it 5 years or 50?
Yeah, it's going to be a long time. It's at least a generation. There's too many people with too much vested interest, too much tenure going on, too much admin. You know, dream world. Somehow, on a federal level or a state level, governors decide to just cut off funding like they did in Hungary to anything that's not practical, right? Just completely shut down all departments that aren't practical and say you can't, or at least divert loans. Like, we'll give you college loans and we'll subsidize your loan and even give you loan forgiveness to a certain degree. According to these metrics, this is what you have to study if you want the money to go there.
No underwater basket weaving for the Pell Grants.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough to see that turn around. And one of the things that's so concerning is we seem to see the ideological push has gone lower and lower and lower. You know, I mean, I think you and I are somewhat similar age. If you remember 20 years ago or so, we all saw this problem on campuses. We just all naively were, that's just college kids and the real world will change them. Well, no, they're changing the real world into a liberal arts campus. Yeah. And so we saw that like 20 years ago. But what I feel, and maybe it's just that I'm in tune to it now and I wasn't back then. That's possible too. But it seems like the ideological thrust has gone younger and younger and younger. I mean, just last week, follower sent me a slide that his son took it was either a 4th or 5th grade public school classroom. And they were teaching about George Washington. And it said George Washington. I mean, they might've been teaching about multiple figures, but this slide was about George Washington. It said, George Washington, enslaver, general of the Continental Army, America's first president. And I thought to myself, what is remarkable about George Washington? Is it that he was a slaveholder in the era of slavery? Or is it his work in founding our nation, right? Rhetorical question. But what are those kids in that classroom being taught? And of course, the ideologues on the other side, you don't want to teach history? You don't want to teach that he was a slaveholder? It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying, what is the aspect of George Washington that we're seeding our young minds with? Is what was important about him back then that he owned slaves? No, almost every man of means for thousands of years going back had owned slaves. So if that's the point of the book, we could write a book on a lot of people. The thing that's important about George Washington was his work in our country. But that goes back to that erosion of the common bonds, right? The kids are being pumped with this now at such a young age that we're talking about how do we solve the university system? Well, shit, man, that may not be the front of the battle anymore. Because if they're getting pummeled with this at 8 years old, who cares about university? It's too late. Yeah, we got a lot of problems in this country. So.
Yeah, we do.
got a lot.
But we could always give up in despair. That's what I'm saying. Like that's always an option. No, it's not an option. Okay, fine. It's not an option.
No, it's not. No, it's not. What we have to do is block out the noise, bring together people. We need to bond over values instead of immutable categories. We need to champion and model the things we wish to preserve. And perhaps most importantly, we need to be willing to speak out against the things we oppose. If we can do those three things, the 85% will bring this country back together. The question is, do enough of that 85% want to walk that hard path when it's going to involve a whole lot less likes on Facebook and probably a couple losses in elections? Not sure the answer is yes. Don't know. Time will tell.
Theo Jordan, man of, do you have a tagline? Oh, coming in hot,
I don't think
but good people.
Yeah. Theo comes in hot, but he's good people. I like that. I'll stick with that. As long as Steve will grant me the copyright further, I'll stick with that.
Yeah. You don't want to get sued over a tagline. Just waste of time and stuff. So where can people find you?
The Birdman. All I'm doing right now is Twitter. Theo_TJ_Jordan at Twitter. And I am writing on my Substack every now and then. Got a link under my bio. I plan on writing there every now and then when I just kind of feel like ranting long form. But for the most part, if you're interested in what I have to say, I write webs of threads that one will lead to another. It's kind of my unique style. Importantly, most of the interlinking threads in my longer threads aren't important. They're sort of additional thoughts in that direction. You typically can read one of my threads and just skip all of the links. But I've gotten some complaints that there's sort of an abyss and one links to another. But I enjoy writing that way. It's one of the things I miss in Substack is the ability to cross-link the content so quickly. Twitter is very unique in that regard. Come visit my page and partake in our conversation. I enjoy the comments a whole lot more than I enjoy writing posts.
Well, it's you're a great follow, and you are apparently good people. So thanks for joining me. I had a lot of fun. Do you guys have any plans for Christmas? You're gonna?
Now we're taking it easy with my fam down here, and then we're going to go up to the cold of the New York area to visit my in-laws, which I'm looking forward to. It's nice to get about 2 weeks of cold, and then I'm ready to come.
What's the temperature down in Florida about right now?
Mid 60s. We were 71 over the weekend. We got down to like 54 the other night, and everybody had their scarves and gloves out. It's pretty funny. I used to live up north. I understand real cold. Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Benjamin. I was truly honored to be able to come chat with you, man.
It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Pleasure's all mine. Take care.